Good afternoon and welcome to the second day of Paris Men's Fashion Week on Show Studio. Unfortunately, Rick Owens isn't usually what I'm dressed in, but when I have borrowed some Rick Owens, its rightness is infinite. So let's talk about the show. Matthew, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Matthew Stone and I'm an artist.
My name's Davies. I'm the men's fashion director of Wonderland.
I'm Mandi, Lennard. I run a fashion consultancy called Mandi's Basement and I write for various websites.
Hello, I'm Hywel Davies, fashion writer, and I'm also course leader of fashion communication at Central St Martin's.
So maybe the most obvious thing to discuss about Rick, first of all, is, I mean, he's sort of the most mass zeitgeisty designer there actually is out there at the moment. Mandi, why do you think that is?
I think he was one of the people that came on my radar that was starting all the layering. He definitely did the very long, narrow men's t-shirts. He was the first one that I saw to do that. And that encourages layering because those t-shirts were longer than the jacket that you would wear with it. And also, he does, commercially, the collections are really solid. So when the buyers go for their appointments, they buy completely differently. It's got depth. So usually at the end of a season, when you do your sales, that window, that time where you have to get all your orders in for the next season, you usually get in touch with the buyer at the end to say, oh, these are the styles that got cancelled, and they're usually the styles that people haven't bought. But with Rick, it's got depth, but it's good, and you find that it does do the sales. So what's exciting about it at retail is that when you go in the stores, it always looks different, but it's always, it looks fresh. It's not like the same jacket is appearing everywhere. It's really exciting, and it sells, and the buyers invest in it.
That's interesting. And what do we Andrew, what do you think to the Adidas collab?
I think it's great. I think it's, it's not a classic Adidas collaboration. Normally, the designer has to conform to an Adidas silhouette and stuff, and it's quite an ugly shape for a traditional sneaker form. And I think that's something quite exciting for Adidas because it's a new way to talk to new people, definitely.
It's interesting, isn't it, that sort of such a strong designer is courted by brands like Adidas and Eastpak. He's not obviously commercial, but yet his strength of brand is massively what people want to buy into, and one of the things I really like is the whole kind of street goth, ninja goth thing. Why do we think that sort of has been such a, I mean, all of you I'm sure have got great opinions on this. Why do you think the ninja goth thing has been such a massive thing in menswear? The kind of urban goth.
I think what you said, when you sort of said before about him sort of reflecting the zeitgeist, I think to me the zeitgeist is about what you're talking about, what's relevant to now. But if you look at Rick Owens, what he does doesn't really change that much each season. It's very much about a continuation of that, that goth aesthetic. So I think a bit what you were talking about, Mandi, why the buyers like it, it's because everybody can really identify with what it is. It's very, very clear what his aesthetic is. And it doesn't really change from season to season, it just sort of progresses. And I think that's what people feel that affinity to. It's that clarity of design.
Well, I think there's also, Rick has a really strong balance between a kind of avant-garde and rebellious aesthetic, but it's also incredibly safe as well. I think there's a lot of older women that buy a lot of Rick Owens, and I think for that reason he's able to access people that want to wear something confrontational, want to wear something that is the kind within an aesthetic of kind of otherness in the face of society, but at the same time it can be worn by older women in a way that is, you kind of think that is very safe, and I think that that's part of why it's commercial.
I also think a reason why a lot of people are drawn to it, especially younger people, is through the presentations. If you look at the shows, they're very dramatic, full on, quite edgy, but like you talked about, the clothes are actually quite safe, quite simple. There is sort of elements of Margiela, early Margiela, in terms of the same sort of approach to design. It's kind of classic clothes.
What I suppose when I'm thinking, the ninja goth kind of silhouette, the kind of idea that there was this weird merging between kind of Nordic darkness and American sportswear. Why was that such a big hit with the hip hop guys, Mandi?
I just think it's a really low key look. When you buy something of Rick's, it's very easy to digest into your existing wardrobe, and even if you've got some of Rick's pieces from seasons before, they all look as fresh or as old as each other. When you buy a piece of his, it goes through a metamorphosis as well, the way it ages. I mean, he's an incredible master at fabric technology. I mean, the fabrics are really stunning, and you don't see that in the show, I don't think. You see that when you're in the store and you're touching the fabrics, or when you see it in his showroom. It was interesting what Matthew said about the older woman customer, because when that put me off at the beginning, actually, because he did those washed leathers very early on, before I saw anyone else doing it, in a very fitted shape, but lots of draping, and it reminded me of very, very early Donna Karan customers from back in the day, where women would almost like part with any money if they were buying something that fitted them and draped them and it was comfortable. So I think it was a kind of comfortable brand for women to buy into, a very easy wardrobe basic pieces, but now I see it as a brand, and it's developed much more beyond that. And we were talking when we first got here about how before Christmas on Instagram we could see that Michelle Lamy, Rick's wife, was going around all the art openings one night in New York with ASAP Rocky, who again Rick's friendly with. There's a relationship with, and again it's this idea that a lot of stylists that we know have been going out socially for the last few years wearing really baggy shorts with drop crotch. I mean, I would never imagine people wearing those sort of clothing, a casual look like that, a kind of cocktail launch event in London fashion that we all go to regularly. But actually that's a very normal way of dressing now, and I think Rick was very instrumental in that.
It's total 24/7 clothes, isn't it?
But I think it works both ways, and I think that people that come from a kind of sportswear street style perspective can access the clothes because of the obvious influence on it, but it also has this added layer of being high fashion, and so in that sense it has that kind of aspiration of moving from being a street style thing into a high fashion thing. And I think that in a similar way it's maybe a way for somebody who doesn't want to wear Supreme to a cocktail party to approach that aesthetic and still be like, oh, don't worry, it's still really expensive.
It's more of a luxury look for that sort of person, isn't it?
Right.
For an evening, or like you say, any time of day.
And also the materials that you were saying before, they are luxury materials. And I think what is significant is the way that he handles them in such a kind of laissez-faire way, that there is this kind of roughness to the way that he handles materials that are normally, only associated with kind of high-end luxury goods. Well, like his furs are like pelts. They're kind of tribal or.
We have a whole fur floor in his studio where they experiment with furs.
I also think that the brand, because it is independent, it's not owned by any of the other big fashion houses, it does feel like an independent brand. I don't know what you guys think, but you get the sense of that, it's very single vision by Rick and his team, and you do feel like that's very distinct, and that they're doing their own thing. And I think people like that sort of feeling of empathy with those sort of independent designers that are doing their distinct thing.
But I think that's not just an empathy to kind of support the underdog. That is actually people recognizing an uncompromised vision.
Definitely, yeah.
And so rather than something which is filtered through tons of kind of research and consultancy, it is a purer or more confident vision. Yeah. And I guess a lot of the things that he does use the word ugly about the trainers. There are these kind of difficult aspects, but I think that against that background, they kind of are able to have. I don't know. It's like you can approach them more, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very clever proposal what he's doing, because like we've all talked about, his clothes are very wearable, but he's managed to keep this identity of a really strong brand, and also they're linked to art, and he crosses over different areas. So he's always presenting this image that it is a very joined up way of approaching fashion. But I don't know even if it is fashion, if it's more about style.
Well, it's also very brutal which I think is, you know, something that appeals to a lot of us. And also I think, you know, I've never seen a designer's flat go as viral on the websites that I look at anyway, as his. And you know, I mean, it's just extraordinary. Like his where he lives and how he lives, and his sort of concrete, you know, and the fact that millions of sort of teenage boys around the world know what his shower looks like, and what his like. It's so cool. It's like everything that my teenage self wants a shower to. It's just a
I've been in the shower.
You know, nah.
I have.
Of course you have.
I'm jealous.
With Rick.
With your bubble hat
Rick
on.
and Michelle were away and I stayed in their apartment. And he has got, I love the way that you use the word brutal, because he has got incredible taste.
Yeah, there's
and
bare
he
wires
designs
everywhere.
furniture. I mean, he's very much part of Frieze when, you know, he shows his new, and him and Michelle go to Frieze. I mean, it's a very important, they're incredibly
Dubai.
cultured. And one of the things that I find really interesting is when you mentioned the independent, as an independent company, you know, when they meet people, I know when he met you, when Michelle and Rick met you, Matthew, just like when they met Monica from Some Things magazine, they identify these really interesting people that they want to know and they invest in them. They don't just meet them and it's a frivolous exchange.
But there's also, I mean, because I'm friends with Rick and Michelle and I've worked with them on a few projects, but what I would say is I'm not actually sure that they can be friends with people unless in some sense they're working with them. And I think it's probably something you all speak very well about, Daryoush, but I feel like the biggest thing that we haven't talked about yet is their tribe and them. And, you know, talk about the house, but the house is the backdrop to them. And it's interesting how the aesthetic permeates not just the things they're making, not just the things they're wearing, but this kind of abstract amoral philosophy that surrounds him.
Well, it's interesting, just not quite as an answer to that, but I remember Miuccia Prada saying when I interviewed her years ago, you know, just being friends isn't interesting. She was like, because I was asking her what she talks to her friends, and she was like, I don't just have some random conversation. I'm working.
You're exploring somebody though by working with them. You're finding, going through an experience, sharing an experience with somebody is getting to know them, I think, anyway.
What's the most luxury good on earth? I mean, sorry to break the fourth wall, but when I first came here, I had a conversation with Nick about what a wonderful project show studio was. And it's just like, you're getting to meet all these people. And as a designer, by curating this selection of people that just come to you, it's the greatest luxury. I mean, what good could be great company and the opportunity, because you can only make dreams happen if you have the right people to work with, right?
I think also, I hope it's okay to mention this, but Rick himself as a person is incredibly disciplined. You know, his regime, like he'll go to the gym at the set time every day. They eat al fresco as often as possible. But the way, you know, he's very, very fit guy and strong, and he's got really good mental strength. And I think that, again, that contributes to this vision that he's created. And you know, the day before his show, when it's the women's show, he'll be at Gareth's show to support Gareth, probably at his most busiest period where he shouldn't really leave the studio. But he's so chilled and relaxed, sat with him at the last show, having a gossip. I mean, he's a pretty down guy.
Yeah, I think he's kind of, routine is the right word, because I talked to him before about stress, and he just said that he doesn't get stressed out anymore. He used to get stressed out about timing, but he realised that there actually is enough time to do the show. And so you put in the time to prepare it, and it then happens. So
how much is Matthew? Maybe you can answer this, because I know you made a track with Michelle. How much is Michelle and how much is Rick? And I don't mean that in some sort of horrible, like, oh, is it all Michelle? I think love stories are beautiful, and I think people working together in a couple is fantastic.
I think they have different characteristics that reflect onto what they do together. I know in a practical sense, I know that Michelle takes Rick's designs and then facilitates them for the furniture. And so that's really Michelle's project. And as I understand it, she is quite practically involved with the furs. But in terms of them and who they are and how their characters impact on the way that they work, because I think they're both so strong, their characters are so strong. I feel like Rick is very ordered and strong and kind of focused, whereas Michelle is just a whirlwind, and she has this kind of goth. I was asked to interview her for days for the Dark Arts issue, and they kind of kept saying like, oh, why don't we talk about the rumours that she was raped by wolves, and like, I want to know about witchcraft and black magic. And Michelle is one of the warmest people. I mean, certainly, you know, I think my feeling is that she takes no prisoners. You know, she's not running around giving out to everybody. And I think the thing is, you know, if their house is famous on Instagram, I think Michelle's hands and her teeth are, you know, the next level. So Michelle, I think everybody wants to be a part of it, but I think when people are sort of let in, or if you do know Michelle, she's so incredibly warm. She's so incredibly optimistic. She reminds me of a toddler. She's just wandering around the world and just in awe of things. She really experiences an ongoing sense of wonder. And I think that's what makes her ageless. Because
I think they're very inspiring as a couple.
Yeah.
You know, when you're with them, it's very seductive. They lift you up, and he's in bewilderment of her. I mean, he's totally inspired by her. When they say she's a muse, she's not a muse in the classical sense, but he is utterly inspired by her. And they have found the recipe for enjoying life. I mean, everyone's looking for that recipe, and they appreciate the good things. But good things are sitting on a terrace, just taking half an hour to have a chat, or, you know, having something that the daughter's just cooked.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, they're very embracing of life, and I find that really, really special.
Well, I mean, it's funny, like how many famous couples you never see kissing or embracing, and there's a quite famous picture, I can't remember what magazine it was, but like, you know, Rick's sort of like this around Michelle. And I just, you know, I think that's great.
She gets really frustrated if you go to a restaurant and, you know, the seating is suddenly someone's on either side of Rick. You know, Rick and Michelle always sit together. They love sitting together. You know, they're just warm in each other's company.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And why, I know this is a bit of a rewind, but I just do want to press that idea of, because I don't know, well, tell me that I'm talking rubbish, but I do feel that he is the most connected to youth culture right now of all the menswear designers. The one that's most...
I feel like there was a period where his aesthetic was everywhere, like All Saints was just completely ripping it off, and it was, you know, that kind of the slim arm and the kind of sort of biker jacket without the top. That I feel like there was a point where that aesthetic was really zeitgeisty. And I feel like at the moment, his aesthetic isn't like on trend in the same way that it was at that point. I don't know when it was, I'm really bad with linear time. But I feel like with the last show, you know, with the fact that the show was on BuzzFeed.
The women's wear show.
Yeah. And then BuzzFeed followed up by interviewing one of the steppers. You know, you know, in terms of zeitgeist and political zeitgeist, I feel like, I think for me that was just the most interesting fashion show. I think, you know, in the last, or the
that
most
was
important.
just the most historic thing ever to happen.
Yeah,
really.
and I feel like it would have been impossible for me to come on this and not talk about that show. And I think something that could be really interesting to explore is how he moves on from that. Like, what can you do after making a statement like that? And so I think in terms of the zeitgeist, I mean, it's amazing to create an aesthetic, but to make a political statement within fashion that resounds in all kind of powerful ways, that captures the public imagination beyond the realms of fashion, is fucking amazing.
How did you feel at that show, Andrew?
Do you know, I didn't see the show in person, but obviously I saw the press on it. The project was filmed a bit by a friend of mine, Danielle Levitt, so she followed them for 5 months, and so I knew that the project was going ahead and stuff. It was amazing, but I was at the men's show the season before, that season, and that was when, you know, like a witch wizard came out and started screaming, and it was an Estonian punk band, Winnie Pugh, and it was like they were like werewolves, and literally just to watch the faces of the American press opposite, so shocked that he would do this, you know, at lunchtime. And then there was guys that were being spun round but playing drums. It was like the show of the season, definitely. And just to take you somewhere for 15 minutes. And a lot of the press didn't watch the show, they watched the things, but I was very conscious to watch the clothes at the same time because that was the deal for me. And it was unbelievable. And I was never a massive Rick fan, I'd never buy it before. But yeah.
I mean, I do think that there's a practical comparison to be made between those two shows, but one is theatrics in a sense, and the other one is incisive political comment and provocation. And I think it's one thing, you know, there's a great tradition of fashion designers destroying the catwalk, you know, strictness and saying, I'm going to be a wild child. And, you know, that's something that's worked for Gareth, for McQueen, for Rick. But I think that, I don't know, I just think that it was...
I think what I loved about it though was, you know, fashion's at its most wonderfully political when it's just does what it does and is positive. And it wasn't protesting or being angry or angsty, it was just a load of women dancing.
And it was a celebration. It came across as a massive celebration of beauty.
Yeah, and I think what's great about it is that often a lot of things that are kind of self-consciously positive are often very weak in their kind of cultural punch. They're not always the coolest things. People fetishize. It's easier to kind of create something that seems disaffected and aloof, which is very much a kind of 20th century idea of kind of rebellion in a sense that comes from the 50s.
But he had so much aloof capital, didn't he? Because when Mark Fast did Fat Ladies, it was a disaster for him, really.
But I don't think Rick was doing Fat Ladies, I think he was doing women. And I don't think it was strictly about size. I think that, I don't know. I mean, the thing is like, I'm aware that seeing the show, I don't have a woman's perspective, so I'm kind of thinking about it. I can't talk as a woman.
Sorry, but when Rick, there was some interview and Rick spoke about Michelle, and he said, without Michelle, I'd be a straight line. And I guess one of the kind of exciting things about the stepping show was that, you know, this format, this straight line format, this very severe thing, this thing that you think of Rick Owens, he was just going and smashing all the windows in.
But I think it's quite interesting that he's able to do that, because obviously the clothes were different because of the way they were shown, but because he has got that ability to have this joined up aesthetic, I think he's quite in a fortunate, unique position that he can do shows like that, because the audience is still going to know, and the press and the buyers are still going to know what Rick Owens' clothes are. I don't know if so many designers could have that freedom.
Can you imagine someone like Stella McCartney going to her backers and saying, this is what I'm planning for this? I mean, I think it's Hywel's point about the independent nature of his company, that he has the freedom to do it.
But it's not luck that creates a situation like that. It's fearlessness and determination.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it was very clever.
We're talking about, you know, the big brands. If you're a designer and you have all the backers and all the different territories.
I'm sure he could have worked for a big brand at some point.
Why had you? Because we all seem to be a bit mega fans.
You are, aren't you?
Well, Mandi and Matthew seem to be family, and I'm jealous. But no, we're all mega fans. But why did you? It's really interesting that you said you hadn't really wasn't really in your
I mean,
field of
he's always been on my radar and stuff. It's not clothes that I would normally call in for a shoot. I think I bought Tiny some stuff for the Olympics for the closing ceremony, and that fitted the brief that we wanted. The stuff was hanging around mine for a bit, and I started trying stuff on. I realised that the t-shirting was like the softest thing ever, and I'd heard before that affluent women with money that wear Saint Laurent and Gucci in the daytime wear his t-shirts to the gym because they don't want to wear sportswear because it's so scratchy on their skin and it's so soft and stuff. So, and then I just started to buy a couple of pieces myself, and then I kind of been absorbed now.
The fit's extraordinary, isn't it? I remember this bomber that I borrowed for a job interview in Milan, and I didn't get it. But this bomber,
the bomber or the job?
the job, and I didn't get it, but I was so in love with the way this bomber felt as I left the job interview, when I was told that, you know, you haven't got the job. I sort of just didn't care. And it's like, you know, because I'm not used to wearing clothes that cost, you know, 4 figures and up. And the fit, but the fit is extraordinary. I mean, it like removed a stone, and yet from the outside you couldn't tell. And a couple of people were like, "Oh, it doesn't look that expensive," but it just felt beyond.
Yeah, but the price points are like, you know, it's 110, 120 for a long t-shirt, which I think's, you know, fine. And then, you know, to £2,000 to £60,000 to a fur coat, there's price points and there's entry points for every level for people with.
Yeah, people can
not
buy
every
into
level,
it.
let's be realistic.
But the architecture in the clothes, like, I mean, it's you know, I think people miss that when they're just looking at pictures. They don't, you know, and the fit is beyond.
I don't wear it. I've not bought it, so I'm still a fan of him and them and I like the clothes. But
she wears a lot of Margiela, doesn't she?
I don't know.
Yeah, and Gareth.
And Yoji maybe.
Does she wear Margiela now? Like new Margiela?
I don't know. But Ray Karakuba always said that you should see the person before the clothing. And I think that Rick is such easy clothing. I mean, it's so wearable. And I don't think when you wear a piece of Rick, you particularly need to validate it by wanting somebody to realise that you're wearing Rick Owens. I think, and it's an instant look.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not fashion, but it's fashionable. And it kind of makes you feel like you're fashionable, not trendy. And I, as someone who's got a couple of pieces, I wouldn't worry that somebody knew it was Rick or not.
No.
I just want to look fashionable.
Of course.
And if I wear it, I don't look ninja goth, I don't think.
I think it's really
built into my own wardrobe.
Dare I say ginger goth?
But I think that's really interesting because you've mentioned that, you know, about the aesthetic of the tribe, and you know, you talk about it, and you go to the shows and you see all those kids outside, and they, you know, they look like those goths. But it is only really the shows that you see that vision. When you see it in store, it's really so different, isn't it? Because it's actually just beautiful, really well crafted, you know, garments. So to me, the show is very sort of confusing in some ways of what the brand is about, you know, because that's what everybody sees those shows, and it is that.
But isn't that what people always want?
Yeah,
the
that's what they
idea
buy
of
into.
engaging with rebellion without actually having to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's very clever. Because I'm not a huge fan of the clothes personally, but I completely respect the vision. I completely.
When you see it in the store as well, you don't see that it's Rick Owens. You just see it. You can't tell immediately what the brand is. The label isn't obvious or anything, and it's just this wearable clothing. And you kind of, I think you kind of compliment yourself that you've kind of thought, you've had the confidence to think, oh, this looks good. Let's try this on without worrying about who it was by.
Yeah. Sorry, I just like half still thinking about what Matthew just said. Sorry, as what Matthew, what are Rick's, like, you know, cultural references?
I don't know if it's something that he's completely explicit about. I think there's a lot of.
What does he get excited about if you're at dinner?
I don't know, people, I guess, like people that he thinks are amazing, or that's kind of what we talk about. I mean, he had talked about the Steppers to me long before that happened. I didn't know it was going to happen. It was an amazing experience to go to the show not knowing what was going to happen, but he'd I think he sent me a video, a really weird YouTube link of something, and I think music is something that he's really into. But I mean, I think there's a lot of 20th century sculpture references. I think modern art is a big influence, sort of. So yeah, I think 20th century design in terms of architecture, furniture, and then sculpture, I think, is a big influence, and and American hip hop culture.
Mandi? Because you know them a little bit. What?
Well, I think the way that I'm judging that is seeing how the world that they're in is. So the artworks and pieces that they have, they get very, very excited about. They take a lot of energy from the pieces that are in their apartment. And I think that as much as Matthew was saying about the modernist and the new arts, the designers coming through, which are inspiring a lot of designers lately, as we've seen from Raf and whoever.
By modern, I meant like 20th century, rather
I know,
than
I think there's a lot of classic
artists.
stuff as well. I think he's just somebody who's feeding off culture, and he's hungry for it. And nothing. If it got easy and he was comfortable with something, he'd be uncomfortable.
I feel like there's a lot of interest in kind of ancient culture as well. So things like, I don't know, things feel like not necessarily. It's almost like looking at Egyptian sculpture or something like that. It has this sort of esoteric feel to it, but then it also has this kind of grandeur and statuesque feel. So
we should look at the clothes in a second, but I'm a bit dim and didn't actually know that much about Michelle's time in LA, but you guys, I think particularly Andrew and Mandi, sort of knew quite a bit about when they met in LA and the sort of restaurant that Michelle owned, and that sounded really interesting. Would you just fill us in?
Michelle has the club in Paris that she does. You're involved with. You go over to Paris to DJ, though, don't you?
Yeah, I have done in the past. I mean, yeah, Michelle ran a venue, a restaurant in LA called Le Café Deux. And it was a kind of restaurant and bar. She had, she used to perform there. She
sings.
Or raps. I'm not sure. But she also has a history of doing striptease. She was originally some kind of lawyer, and she stopped doing that and studied under Deleuze. She was a student of his. She studied at this institute where, how do you say it, Gilles and Deleuze?
And they did the whole rhizome and this kind of schizo.
Well, the schizo thing is relevant because she was at the hospital where they were treating schizophrenics, and I think that had a big influence on her. And then, as I understand it, she became a stripper, but not in a kind of strip club way, more in a kind of roadside freak show way. This is. Wow. I watched a video the other day where she was talking about this, and we talked about it a bit. But Michelle's stories are kind of unending. They're not linear. They're not like this happened and this happened. They're kind of vignettes, and they're quite cyclical. So I can talk about things, but I don't think I can give a kind of chronologically accurate thing.
Well,
but the cafe was, it was, from the sound of things, it was Grace Jones singing a cappella, Madonna on the bar, Gore Vidal outdoors with some tattoo artists, and
you had to know about it, and I think it looked like a complete garage from the outside.
Yeah, it was in a car park.
But it was incredible, and it was a real scene, and a lot of people that I come across over the years, like the guys that own Chrome Hearts and whoever, they know Michelle from back in the day then, when there was this cult restaurant and cabaret going on.
let's look at the show. Sorry for talking so much, but it was brilliant. Thanks for filling us in on the restaurant history. So we have brown. Andrew, maybe you could start us on the clothes.
I think what's always interesting, it's always a mixture of textures. So there's jersey, there's like pony skin or something, or leathers and stuff, and that layer, definitely. And then I'm sure this is the Adidas collaboration as well still.
What's in the background?
It almost looks like an altar.
Because he always uses the same venue. And
It's not the Bercy venue, it's a different venue.
Is it? Oh, okay. I was going to say, because if it was the Bercy, they built that.
I mean, that's very clever, the draping in the leather and that top, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
It doesn't fall like that by chance, that's a properly fashioned piece.
But it looks that it's more of a regular catwalk show than performance, as opposed to the last two collections.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, we wouldn't get so much of a sense.
He doesn't need to do that anyway. He didn't need to do it last season, but we're glad he did.
I actually think it would undermine the last show.
Yeah,
because he's done it.
And I think what everybody does, they strip back after a crazy show. You know, Mutual does it.
Yeah.
Everybody does it. Marc Jacobs does it. There's always a time of calm after something that's quite special like that.
But I think if you do unravel something creatively, it's important to take time to process what it means in relation to what comes afterwards.
And it is very hard to sort of digest all this without being there with the music.
Hearing the music.
And, you know, the pace of the Recovery show, it's always so fierce.
But the silhouette is a lot cleaner than it has been recently.
There's a lot of this plum brown kind of. Do we think that when this goes in the shops, it'll be available in other colours?
I'm sure it'll be black.
Black and grey.
I'm sure the buyers will buy black.
I'm sure there's a customer though that it's sad to say, but there is a customer that literally wants what's on the runway, and the buyers are under a lot of pressure. From having been a buyer myself, when you show people, you know, collections, they want what's in the show.
That's interesting.
Which I find different with Comme des Garçons, because I always like what wasn't in the show. I think that's kind of cooler.
Right.
You know, in Dover Street, when they get the new collection, there's pieces that actually weren't in the show, and I'm thinking, well, that's cool, because it wasn't in the show.
Yeah.
But,
do you think that that's more of a recent phenomenon, people wanting catwalk looks?
Well, with communication and internet, everything, they've got more access to seeing what is in the show.
But also the idea of high fashion as being streetwear is so much more pervasive now. Like the audience for fashion is so much bigger.
Much more
Good
accessible.
point. Here we're going back to black.
Yeah.
The do-rag is a sort of funny touch.
Well, it's the women were wearing something similar. It's not that dissimilar from what was in the women's in terms of headgear.
And in Craig Green's show at Man, he had those very tight skull cap looks, didn't he? There's a big sleeveless thing going on here as well. So you could say that some of the tabards in J.W. Anderson's show, this whole kind of longer, lean, sleeveless look.
You know, that is just panel after panel after panel. People have been going. You could say that this relates to JW. It's very strange, and it's you know, and yet there's very little love directly for him, and yet everybody is talking about how influential he is.
I don't think JW Anderson influenced Rick's silhouette here, though.
No, not at all.
But well, he always does a sleeveless, doesn't he? But I mean, it's not just Mandi. Then it's like so many people have mentioned.
Is that a sheepskin, like that armoured sheepskin where they have a panel? Is that sheepskin on the edge of it? Because that looks quite interesting, the way that it's fitted. I mean, it looks quite technical.
Isn't that a raw edge of maybe the sheepskin's inside?
Yeah, but they're clever pieces. I mean, they look like armour, don't they?
How?
I just think it looks a lot sort of. It's kind of almost more masculine. Like sometimes I think it's really, really androgynous, but it just looks sort of quite sort of tough compared to sort of previous, not last season, but maybe the previous seasons before that. But the thing is that, you know, it is definitely Rick Owens. There isn't. It's not like we're trying to search out a new trend, really, because it is this development of what he's always done. You know, the long pants, the shorts over trousers, elongated top half. It's, you know, it's very sort of distinct silhouettes.
I like the way this head thing there was gone from do-rag and it's almost gone into like a religious piece now.
Yeah, because I think that
and I think
with
he's
the
playing
women's,
with something
really
there, definitely. I think that's a very
I've
quiet
never heard the
statement.
expression do-rag before.
Really?
How do you spell it?
D-U-R-A-G.
Oh, okay.
I'll get you on band.
I think.
That reminds me of the, you know, the Hussein season with the women's.
But I think in the women's collection, the headpieces that had a similar kind of silhouette, I'm not actually sure. I can't remember whether. I think that they're less of a do-rag structure. I think that they were referred to as habits.
Right.
They were.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a conscious reference in terms of religion.
The best. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazingly elegant thing, the sort of nun's habit. I just can't help but think of Marianne Faithfull doing I've Got You, Babe with David Bowie and the nun's habit.
It is also really minimal, you know, because a lot of the times with the collection, there's an awful lot of layering going on. There's like 3 tops, 2 pairs of trousers, and it's
a lot cleaner, isn't it?
I mean, Look 32 just looks like Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is great. That's a compliment.
But I mean, he has that futuristic plus ancient thing going on.
I like the dove grey actually. It's just a nice. It's got the freshness of a winter white, what was traditionally a winter white, and I think that mixing that in with your existing black Rick Owens wardrobe, that's a nice lift for a fresh new season look, if it were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, black has. I think in the same way as in the 80s, people sort of had a bit of a rejection. I think black has become such an easy thing to do that there's a bit of a rejection of it going on. It's you know, my corner shop painted itself all black a few months ago.
Fashion is everywhere.
It is. One
That's busier.
Yeah, what is that?
It looks like almost like a kind of
survival.
jacket, yeah.
mobile phone chargers and things like that.
No, you see, that's the thing where the trick could be. In 2 months' time, he could announce that that's the collaboration piece with the technology company, and it's got some secret properties that we haven't realised.
Right.
Or it might be a full-blown parachute that you can wear.
Yeah. An alternative to Google Glass. The headpieces, I meant.
Oh, here he is.
There he is.
No wonder he likes sleeveless. Look at the muscles on that.
Easy.
I've been doing pull-ups. I'm working on it. Yeah.
So we're going to see in a sleeveless tank next
in
season.
about 6 months.
But it will be Jada and Anderson, not Rick.
Yeah, it'll be halter neck.
I should mention Panos though, because Panos styles this show.
Yeah.
And you know Panos quite well, don't you, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an ongoing project for him. I think it's quite a full-time project for him, isn't it? I think, you know, it's a great collaboration. They found
But I
each
think
other and stuff.
How long have they worked together?
Panos saw some of the first show. I think he was the first stylist ever. I think he saw the show or saw some of the clothes and apparently just turned up and then was kind of always there and sort of helping
Part of
a
the
bit.
crew,
And it hasn't changed. So...
And I think it's quite interesting, they talk about, when I've interviewed him before, about a lot of the models that are in the show, they actually work in the studio, so it is that, you know, that community of people.
Or in the store.
Okay.
The Dove Grey is gorgeous.
But that's part of that whole thing of creating this sort of new idea of a tribe.
Yeah, the identity.
I mean, people say the best way to make a million is start a religion. And the references are all there.
Well, Panos, you know, he's a brand in himself, isn't he? I mean, you know what he looks like, you know what he likes.
I don't think that's a conscious thing, though.
Oh no, he doesn't
great,
want people
though.
to know what he looks like.
No, for sure. But I mean, I think it comes from creative commitment rather than a business model for designing a brand, which obviously what we're talking about here is kind of.
But it's great. I mean, Andrew also, when, you know, because I've known and worked with Andrew we were working in the same building on the same floor 13 years ago, and Andrew sort of was always very about a certain, I don't know, fancy sport, like futuristic-y, sportswear-y
You were
kind
one of the
thing.
first stylists that I knew that was wearing all the sports stuff. I mean, you had a baseball cap and all this.
You know, you had that funny kind of poppy sportswear-y thing going on, and I've always associated with you with that, and you were very forward.
Yeah, almost like a hip-hop vibe before the hip-hop fraternity were kind of following fashion so.
And before it was on the
rapidly.
catwalks, you know, and I think that's really interesting as a stylist to have that you know, that energy, and so, you know, it tunes back into Panos having that energy for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about having distinct DNA, isn't it? It's about the right. Sorry, Andrew.
I mean, it wasn't a conscious decision, but I think a lot of stylists look like their work, and my work at the time was a mix of contemporary wear and streetwear and colour, and the way that colours were put together, and then, you know, as you know, you said, it's a commitment, and you look like that. You know, Panos does look like his work. A lot of stylists do. Yeah. A lot of stylists that work so fast wear a white shirt and Levi's, and that's it. And they've always done that because they want to separate that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fits for designers as well, doesn't it?
But
although Rick's pretty Rick looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's the perfect muse for his own label, isn't he?
Yeah, he talks about having the sort of 20 of the same garment that he just wears day after day after day.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that's actually what I loved about the Casey Hayford show in London. The fact that it didn't have this helping you understand the thought process. It was just random looks and what they were feeling and celebrating subcultures. Whereas this is typically how one would put on a show, which is to send the looks out, and they're very similar, but you're seeing the permutations as they differ between outfits.
So I've got a question from a friend of ours, but first I just thought I'd get the academic authorities' take on the show.
Okay, well, I don't know about academic authority, but I can tell you, you know,
Author of
personal view.
What's your book on menswear?
Modern menswear. Well, actually, it's quite interesting.
This is very modern.
Yeah,
it's
it
menswear.
is. But actually, when I did my book on modern menswear, which was 2008, Rick Owens was one of the first people to sign up for it and was like fantastically supportive of it. Because you know, my understanding about him and what he was doing is it was this clarity of commitment to what his approach to design was, and you know, and just in terms of this show, I don't think it's a particularly outstanding show, but you know, it's about the continuation of an idea. It isn't about this season. I'm all about brown. I don't think he's really into those sort of, you know, transient ideas. It's about, this is my message, and it's a continual story. So, and I think it does that effectively.
But I think his starting point is always his old patterns, and I think that's kind of evident.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I don't know.
So, Mr. Gareth Pugh, another one of Michelle's progenies and obviously a friend of all of ours, says, I was once told that generally speaking, an American designer tends to be driven by a focused aesthetic, whereas European designers frequently have a more narrative-driven approach. Do you think this is a valid statement? And as an American showing in Paris, how do you think this notion applies to Rick? What a good question. So I think the pillars of that question are that Americans have a set thing that they do all the time. Europeans have more of a narrative. How does Rick relate to that?
I think I don't think you can separate that. I almost think it's the narrative is the aesthetic, because that's what his story is about. It's about telling that aesthetic, whether it's through furniture or clothing or whatever he's doing.
I don't think he's conscious of it either.
I guess maybe by narrative there, that sounds to me like he means, you know, the little story that you get at the beginning of every collection.
Okay.
You don't think Rick's conscious of
Well, I think the story is his tribe. You know, that is the constant.
I think it's the spirit of who Rick is. I don't think he needs to, you know, when he gets interviewed backstage afterwards and everyone's asking him about it, he's just reiterating who he is. I mean, I'm looking at this collection and yes, it's still the hallmarks of who Rick is. We know it's a Rick Owens show, but actually there's a lot of fresh areas, like a lot of those really long sleeveless pieces in the leather. That's quite a great, that's quite a new thing, and I think that especially if you're wearing this kind of what's traditionally outerwear indoors, having it sleeveless and wearing something that's long like a tabard in leather, that could be a nice new Rick Owens piece for my wardrobe.
For sure. Andrew?
I think every designer has to have a narrative, whether you're Michael Kors or you're Rick Owens. You need a starting point. Not only, you know, what pieces sold last season and what can you reintroduce again commercially to make money, but also you just need somewhere to start. It's your inspiration, it's a narrative, and I think, I think any designer has to have a narrative, whether you're commercially successful or not.
I don't feel like I know enough about different designers to make a statement about American designers versus European designers. I know that when I think about American creativity, particularly in like commercial fields, sort of separate from the idea of an artist doing whatever they want, that things certainly seem to be much more commercially focused and safe. I think that that's because places like New York have stronger creative industries, and I think as a result of the sort of there being less money for young people to work on commercial projects in London, London has creative scenes. I don't know if this actually relates to the question. So it's industries versus scenes, and in industry you have a client and the client has a say in what you're doing. In a scene you do what you want, and I know which one I prefer.
Well, I think, because I was wondering, I was going to ask you this anyway earlier, how much LA there is in Rick's work. And one of the things I think is interesting about, you know, because the last collection was called Vicious, and he said it was about being excluded from the punk world that he wanted to be part of. And punk in England in the 80s was a bit of a joke. You know, we'd done it all, and it was something that either people with drug problems or sort of fashion victims engaged in the 80s. But in America, punk had a second life, and a much truer life to its original kind of, you know, you had punk gangs like you did sort of in Germany, you know, and you had also the whole kind of hardcore scene as well, which, you know, a lot of those hardcore gangs in Boston were criminal gangs. They weren't just a fashion thing. So maybe, because Rick is like a subculture, that kind of the fact that his trend doesn't change every season, he is much more like a subculture maybe. And maybe that's the Americanism, in the same way that, you know, Calvin Klein is a sort of glacier moving towards you. Maybe Rick Owens a bit like that.
I don't think his collection is particularly LA though. I think his collection is nomad, and he's travelled a lot. He's travelled around, and I think that style has developed with the countries that he's visited and stuff, and he's absorbed something from each country. I don't particularly think, for me it's not like American sportswear or...
Yeah, it feels very different to American designers like Calvin Klein and, you know, those huge brands, doesn't it? So it makes sense that he does show in Paris.
But there's I'll probably always talk about this, but there is that sociology that you get. You know, Prada doesn't, it does, but, you know, a lot of brands...
Say what you want to say anyway.
A lot, so there's a sociology to, he's a definite group, and definitely, you know, Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein tried to tap into a group of people and then market that lifestyle back.
I think something that is maybe more comparable in terms of the types of commitment that people make to a brand. It's almost like something like Abercrombie and Fitch, where there's this whole like dream of a lifestyle and a kind of sense of community, and they're very different dreams. one of which is a nightmare.
Yeah.
They both involve muscles.
Right.
But this is so much about appealing to the people that want to be rebellious, independent.
No, of
It's
course.
not the American wholesome dream, is it? It's definitely about the underdog.
Although Complex magazine did say that Michelle hanging out with A$AP Rocky at the Gagosian was the new American dream.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
I think when Gareth mentions American designers, he means the commerce of big brands like Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein as kind of brands that are commercial. But I think with Rick, he has got that Californian easiness about him, and I think that's why. When you talk about designers and where they show, it always adds finesse and refinement when you show in Paris anyway. So I think that him showing in Paris is kind of, it just gives it that edge of finesse and luxury.
Well, it gives it that, yeah, I mean, it makes it so, often in New York when people try and tap into these sort of dreamscapes, it doesn't ring true. And when people do it in Paris, yeah, there's something about Paris, you're right, it's...
Well, I think when you decide to show in Paris as a designer, you're putting yourself up against all the big houses and saying, you know, I have a place here. So it's about confidence as well.
And you can't. It is about confidence, because in Paris you can't get away with things.
Yeah.
It's like when Gareth first showed in Paris. There was that, you felt much more of a spotlight than showing in London. London feels like an easy place to show.
It's tougher, definitely,
Yeah.
in Paris. You can't pull favours. There's only 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's one of the things the designers learn
Production
straight away when they
companies.
get there. The favours, you don't do that type of thing there. You might get a less expensive deal, but there's no freebies.
Right.
And I think the production companies book out every chair in the city, so you can only work through one of the major companies. And there's a kind of, if you step into it, you can't turn up and do your punk rock version of it. You toe the line, or you go back to London.
But you also get the opportunity to show to all the Pratts and the buyers, you know, more so that would be in London, internationally.
But ultimately, I think it goes back to the fact that Rick is confident in what he's trying to convey. I don't think he's trying to assassinate people's characters or anything like that. I think he's just confident with what he's putting out there, but it's not as tactical as I think we're insinuating.
I don't know if it's not tactical, because I think he's obviously, him or his team, I don't know about the team behind him so much, but he must have very shrewd business people behind him, because it's a hugely successful business.
Well, Michelle,
No.
this siren,
Yeah.
this light beam is also an insane business brain.
Well, also they have an amazing guy, Luca Rigeri, who does their sales and distribution, and he's a really wonderful guy. Actually, he's been in the business a long time. He knows all the stores. He's got a lovely manner with the stores, so he knows what the buyers want. And again, you know, the first thing you do, Comme des Garçons do the same. The first thing you do in Paris, once you've had your show out the way, you all meet in the showroom and you go through and you pick what's going to go on the racks, because physically you can't actually put the whole collection on the racks. The whole collection isn't in the show, but if you show the whole collection to the buyers, it's just too confusing. You've got to focus it a bit. And actually, the first few days when you do the sales, you might try different pieces that you weren't sure whether to put out.
Right.
And Luca is very, very good at that. He's really a key person in identifying which areas of the collection to focus on to put out there.
It's really illuminating, because I know you're a former buyer, right? It's really illuminating how because I think he is very strong and very passionate where he comes from, but it's really illuminating the way you're talking about how he sells. It's really interesting.
It's no different to any other brand, to be honest. It's just an incredibly brilliant oiled piece of machinery, Rick. It's you know, he can luxuriate in who he is, because all the infrastructure of his business is just so well run. And I think you find that with brands who have got well run companies. You know, every element is how he wants it to be, and that's why I mentioned him as a person and the discipline he has. That's obviously the ethics of the company. It's just incredibly well run.
It's interesting how many love stories there are at the top of fashion, because you know you've got Prada and Bertolli, you've got Mark and I've forgotten his name, You've got Yves and I've also forgotten his name. But you know, they were in love. Mark was in love. Duffy. There was another one.
The singer.
But you know, there's a lot of power couples at the top of fashion brands. It's quite.
Well, I just think, you know, for a successful brand, you know, or people starting out, you need the creative designer, but you need the business support. You know, you need that infrastructure like Mandi's talking about. We know there's so many designers that come into London and they have all the creative, you know, ability, but they just don't have that support network, which is unfortunately why a lot of them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of designers we know in London, they've got amazing people around them, but those amazing people around them will be the same people around them in 10 years' time. You know, there's a lot. I think it's a brand is built on at the beginning when you haven't got the money as well, loyalty and respect, and having the people around you whose opinions you appreciate. Not yes people, but people that are kind of. Vivienne Westwood had it. I mean, the amount of people I see all these years later, like even I remember Tyza, who was one of my favourite models in her show. She's her PA now. You know, so they have these people that stick with them for years that really believe in them and just are inspired by them, and actually in return the designer is very inspired by them to keep like the relationship.
Ray Calcumber and Adrian Joff is another one. Yeah. I think it's quite amazing because I think that when you know, when you think, well, why did somebody become a pop star and somebody else didn't? And it's often because people essentially fell in love. You know, it's falling in love, and when you fall in love, you can project your sort of deepest desires and you can make them real.
I don't know if it's necessarily about love. Maybe it's about trust, commitment, shared vision.
Everything's about love.
Yeah, everything's about love.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think also there's this idea that, you know, if you've got a certain business, whether it's fashion or not, it's not just you at the head of it. I always have this argument where the designer should be left to be able to design. They shouldn't be distracted by anything else. They should be able to create. And I think what you're talking about, this close relationship, which often turns into a love affair, is you're working so closely with the people who you need to rely on to allow you to indulge in creating, that you can't help start these relationships. I mean, Adrian was working with Comme des Garçons before him and Ray got together, but he was a very instrumental guy in the international business of the company, and yeah, it's just that's why I get really upset about the designers in London. You know, when they have to worry about the money and the show if silly things like we can't afford show invites, whereas actually you just want them to be able to go in a room and design, and it's not fair.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. Okay, let's do closing comments. I think, Andrew, I'd like to start. You know, as you as a kind of fashion director, I'd love to know, you know, kind of you know, very hands-on fashion take on.
I like that. I feel it's very much like early work that he's done. I think he's probably referenced a lot of earlier stuff, the textures and stuff. It's not an in-your-face collection like it has been previously, but the idea of layer and texture is quite interesting. I do like the idea of the streetwear going into religious things. That's quite inspiring as a stylist, and for me could be a starting point for a story. And then as a customer, there are pieces there that I would buy, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. How?
I just really want to see it, see the film, see it moving image, and see what the music is, and just get more of a sense of the atmosphere. Because that, to me, is what Rick shows are about. It's very much about, you know, the clan of people, and you know, it's amazing energy in those shows. So it's very difficult, you know. And I think the clothes are Rick Owens clothes. They're not revolutionary, you know. They're sort of evolutionary, but you know, yeah, it will be a success, obviously.
Matthew,
can you ask me a question?
What's your sign off on this collection, on Rick Owens, on Life, the Universe of Fashion?
I think it's interesting to see the show after the last one. I wish I was there, but I'm happier that I was at the last one.
And Mandi?
Yeah, I just think it looks like, you know, it's organically moved forward. It's unmistakably Rick, and you know, I don't think the show needs to be more than it is. I think I don't feel I need to hear the music or be there. you know, he's put out a collection, but I think that him as a brand and as a person is much more than just his show. I think he's got a lot of interesting projects he's probably going to reveal over the coming months.
Cool. All right, well, thank you, panel. You've been wonderful. That's it from us.